So hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I'm Meg Bouvier. You know me as the person who wrote the courses that you have access to. I'm a neuroscientist turned NIH staff writer turned NIH grant writing consultant. And I'm coming to you live from Western Massachusetts, where it's very hot, and you'll probably hear a lot of construction workers in the background because we have a lot of activity going on here. So I'm here to answer questions live today. So I'm going to start with a little mini tutorial. But my hope is that, the benefit of this is that you can ask specific questions about your application, and other people who are on the call can learn from the questions as well. For those who are new to this, you log in in listen only mode, but you can type your questions in the Q&A box. Be sure to put them in the Q&A box because that's where I'm going to be looking for them. If you want to add a comment to anything we're discussing, feel free to put that comment in the chat box. So in terms of updates, I just want to let you know that I just updated my 10-week work plan deadline push, which is in the course library. So for those of you who are targeting an October 5th deadline, we're about 10 weeks out from when you would want to get your submission into the pre-award support office, which means we're about 11 weeks out from the October 5th deadline. So this is probably a good time for you to start working your way through all of the steps and checklists in that 10-week work plan if you're targeting the fall. So you may want to go ahead and take a look at that. You can also subscribe for email reminders each week to go in and go look at the lesson. A reminder that, of course, things change quickly at NIH. So if you're viewing this as a recording, because we're going to be making this available as a recording to people, always check our NIH website or our courses or newsletters for up-to-date information. Okay, so let's start with my tutorial. So I am going to share my screen. All right, so let's start with, let's see, hold on a second. Okay, so since a lot of you are going to be starting the 10-week work plan, I thought it would be a good idea to talk a little bit about the RePORTER website. Okay, great. All right, so let's take a look at that. So since a lot of you are going to be starting your preparation steps this month, I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about the RePORTER website. And I often get a lot of pushback from grantees about the prep steps, even though I am passionate about people doing their prep steps. It's hugely important that people do them. If there is one thing that I think makes my my grantees who are more consistently successful at NIH stand out from the ones who are not consistently successful, it would be all the prep steps. So I would encourage you all to go in and look at Master the R series part 1, the preparation part. It's less than an hour and it has checklists and all kinds of samples of, what to include in an email to a program officer and things like that. So I think it's a good idea to spend some time this month doing that. So why bother searching the RePORTER website when you have a project idea? Well, first of all, what is the RePORTER website? It's a searchable database of all NIH-funded projects. So you can imagine that could be a very useful thing. And I always send grantees there when they're at the idea phase. That's when you really want to go and take a look. So the things you're going to look for are similar projects, things that are similar to your project idea. So all the searching goes on before you write anything. You also want to identify some possible sponsoring institutes because they might sponsor your project, and you want to look for possible program officers that might be interested in this kind of work. So I always line up some questions for my grantees to ask as they're going through the RePORTER website. So again, this is all at the idea phase. So the first step is to do a search to figure out what projects has NIH funded that are similar to my project idea. And I'm going to pull up the Reporter website in a moment, but I just want to give you a sense of some of the questions that you ask. So the things you're looking for there, are there projects similar to yours in the website? Because if NIH has never funded anything remotely resembling what your project idea is, before you spend a few hundred hours writing that up as an application, you better figure out why that is. So it could be that others have not proposed it, or it could be that they're not interested in funding that kind of work, in which case it would be a wasted effort to put in that application. So better to know that ahead of time. And if there are projects similar to yours, you want to make sure there's nothing too similar to yours. So it's not at all uncommon that I send a grantee off to do this process, and they go through the search and they realize that while there's nothing published in the area in which they're planning to write an application, there actually might have been something funded, or some part of the project they're thinking of doing has already been funded like a year ago, in which case, the only way you're ever going to know that is through a reporter search. And that application is not going to be successful because NIH is duplicating effort there. They're not going to fund something they've already funded. So it's really important to do that. The other thing you want to do is look at sponsoring institutes. So once you have identified a set of projects that NIH has funded that is somewhat similar to your project idea, look at the institutes that sponsored it, because those institutes or institute or center might be interested in funding your project. You might want to list them as primary. Same with the program officer. This is a great way to identify program officers that might be interested in the kind of work that you're proposing to do. Another important thing is to look at which study section reviewed it and deemed that a worthy project. So that information is in there as well, and we'll be looking at where that is. And once you identify a study section or two that you think might be a good fit for you, you can also run the search in a different way, where you search the study section and limit to recent projects to see what they funded in the last year or two, what kind of projects that specific study section funded. So let's take a look at this website. So for those who have never been on the Reporter website, this is what it looks like. You could do a quick search here. You can see I've been searching things lately. Or you could do a slightly more expanded search here, or you can open all of the search fields like that, which is a very useful thing to do. And we're going to look at that a little bit more in a moment. And in terms of the text searches, you're just doing PubMed style search terms here. You guys know how to do this. So you can click here and go over to the matchmaker function. And I've actually preloaded an abstract from a funded project so that there's no confidentiality issue. And what you can do is look for similar projects or similar program officials. So you can run that search. I always hear the Jeopardy music in my head when there's searches like this going on. Yesterday, I was having a lot of trouble getting this to work. So let me see if I do it this way, if it'll. It's going to be persnickety again today. Yeah, not going to work today. All right, so that can be a little challenging, but it will yield a list of projects, and you'll see what that list looks like when we do another search. So going back to that expanded search window, so this was the original window that we had, and then I opened the expanded search window. One of my favorite things to do here, you can limit your search by R01s. You can limit it by institute if you already know what your institute is. This is where you put the R01 term in. This is where you put your PubMed style search terms. I always limit by newly added projects. They bury this in the bottom right for some unknown reason. But what I really love to do is search study sections. Now, keep in mind that the information in Reporter is already about a year outdated. So the information that you're getting is, not going to be as up to date as, for example, what a program officer would tell you. So this doesn't replace having a conversation with a program officer about the vagaries of a given study section and what their potential scientific biases might be. So, but I find it really useful in the early search stages to enter something, and I've preloaded ACTS in here. So you've got to put the acronym, just so you know, don't type out the whole name, just the acronym of the study section, limit it to newly added projects, and then run that search. And these are the ones that they have just funded. That's a very short list. So let's go back and see. Yeah, for some reason, that's very, very short list. Usually it's a much longer list, but this is in its 5th year of funding. The 05 mean it's in its 5th year of funding. This is in its 9th year of funding. I usually there's a much longer list here. I'm not sure why this list is so short. Maybe this study section was disbanded. And that's another thing to know, is that every year there a percentage, I think it's like 20% of the study sections are reviewed by CSR, and they decide if they should keep them or not, or combine them or split them or whatever. So study sections are not static. They're always in a state of change. So it's important for you to do this every single time you write an application. So I usually focus on the ones that say 01 or 02, because these are the ones they funded most recently, or the ones with the really high numbers like 25 or 30, which have been funded consecutively for decades by the study section, because both of those give me different types of information about the flavor of that particular study section and, what they like to see, what they think is worthwhile. So anyway, so that's the end of my reporter tutorial. Does anybody have questions on that? I will stop the share and open my question window. So again, for anybody who's just joining, feel free to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A box. And if you have any comments to add, you can put that, go ahead and put that in the chat box. So I did have some people who emailed me questions before this session. So while we wait to see if anybody at the session live has any questions, I'm going to answer those. So, and I'll answer questions on anything. It doesn't have to be on the reporter website search. If you have any questions at all about an application now or in the future, feel free. Okay, we have one here. What advice would you have for a postdoc, non-clinical, who has 2 years left on ESI status, but minimal grantsmanship experience? Ooh, that's a good question. They are not eligible for K-99, but are there other awards that they may be eligible for? Is there a process for including a postdoc on an R01 grant as an MPI? So there's no, first, let me start with the easy part. There's no, NIH has no rule about what your title has to be in order to serve as a PI on a grant application. However, your organization likely does. So it's not an NIH question. It's a question for your particular university or medical center, because they're probably not going to sponsor an R01 on which a postdoc is an MPI. That's typically not done. So while NIH wouldn't have a problem with it, your organization is probably going to put the kibosh on that and say, no, that's not going to fly. But this other question is a little thornier. So that's a straightforward answer. The other question is a little thornier. So if you have 2 years left on your ESI status, but minimal grantsmanship experience, so typically what NIH likes to see is slow, steady progress, where a grantee maybe applies for some campus grants that might be in the like $20,000 to $50,000 range, and then they use that, and that's like their first experience with applying competitively for something. It's not extra extramural funding. It's not like, external funding, but it's still competitive. And it usually is their first opportunity to revise and resubmit, which is a big skill to learn as a grantee. Then the idea is that you take that money and you use the resulting data to apply for some sort of external funding, probably at a private foundation. So that would be maybe something in the $50,000 to $200,000 range, or if you're lucky, $400,000, but it's usually more like 50 to 100, 200, somewhere in there. And then you use that money to generate data and maybe a publication, and then move on to NIH, either in the K or K series or the small format Rs, and then moving up to the R01, so that you're progressing steadily and showing increasing grantsmanship chops to be able to have somebody give you money and do what you said you were going to do, and turn that money into publications within a budget and a timeline. That's essentially what most reviewers like to see. But if you're 2 years left on your ESI status, that gets a little tricky. So I would probably go straight to use whatever startup money you have, assuming you have some, and try to apply for some for multiple small foundation grants. So you want a shotgun if you have 2 years left on your ESI. And for those who don't know, ESI is early stage investigator status. It confers a big funding advantage for grantees that usually equates to about 5 percentage points improvement in the funding line. So if the funding line for an R01 is at like 8%, it would be 13% for ESIs. So it behooves you to put in as many R01 applications as you can while you have ESI status, but this person is saying, how can you be competitive with limited experience? So with 2 years left, I would shotgun your private foundation applications and put your hands on any possible money you can. The faster the review and turnaround, the better. And use your startup funding as well. You might also, and then try to get an R01 in after you have at least one publication, so that you're slipping it in before that ESI status runs out. Because if, let's say, your ESI status runs out this November, if you put in an R01 for October 5th, a new R01, and it isn't funded, as long as you resubmit within 13 months of the original submission, the A1 will also be reviewed as an ESI, even though your ESI status ran out in the interim. So try to get in a new submission right before the ESI expires, and that buys you another 13 months. The other thing is, remember that you can update your application package from time of upload to 30 days before the study section meets for certain types of information, chief among them being your publications. So you can update publications there. You're not going to land an R01 without at least one publication in the field in which you're proposing. That's a given. The other thing you can do is just put in an R01, knowing that it's not going to get funded. But if you put in a new R01 just before ESI status expires, it buys you that 13 months. So at least you'd be competitive on the resubmission as an ESI. So it's not ideal. Another strategy is maybe find another ESI to be an MPI with you. And that might help you put in a stronger submission. In order to get the ESI funding advantage, both of the PIs have to be ESI. So hopefully that answered your question, Durini. I think I answered all parts of it. Yeah, it looks like I did. Okay, so feel free to keep typing questions into the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring that. And I had a couple of questions that were emailed to me ahead of time. Let me pull those up. Should I mark revisions in my resubmission application? So the answer is, as of, I think it was 26. So for those who don't know, back in the olden days, which people like me remember, you used to have to mark the revisions in your research strategy if you were writing an A1, a resubmission application. And then around 2016, NIH put out a notice saying you don't have to do that anymore. And most grantees didn't. It's hard enough to create a nice format, in a jam-packed 12-page research strategy and make it readable and fit everything in without, on top of that, having to mark the changes. So most people didn't do it. But I recently came across something that actually was brought to my attention by a grantee, where buried in fine print, NIH said you're not allowed to mark the changes, the revisions in your resubmission application. So don't do it. So that one is a quick and easy one. I had somebody earlier this week ask me, can I switch study sections on a resubmission? And I realized we're doing a lot of resubmission questions, and it's July. So this isn't, like we're past the resubmission deadline. So I probably should have saved all these resubmission questions until, like October. But you can switch study sections on an A1. Some people feel the conventional wisdom is, my understanding of the conventional wisdom is that it's bad form to do that. So if you put in an A0 and you pick a study section, and then you put in an A1 and request a different study section, and it's a resubmission, the receiving study section may not look kindly upon that, because they're wondering what your issue was with the first study section. Why did you have some problem with it? It kind of puts them on guard, supposedly. But I had a grantee who told me that he had read somewhere on the NIAID website that if you were triaged and you got a bad review, you should pick a different study section. I had not heard that. So he sent me the link. I have to go look at it. But, so that was a new one by me. Keep in mind that if your summary statements were disastrous and you really felt like it was a fiasco, like the study section, it was the wrong one, they didn't get it, the summary statements were terrible, another option is to put it in as an A0. So, you can revise it pretty extensively and then, give it a different title, alter the aims a little bit, and, make sure that you're restructuring enough so that it looks different than the A0, and put it in as an A0 again, as a new application. And then nobody ever sees the summary statements again. So they're done. You don't have to worry about that. So, that's an option as well. So we're in our last 5 minutes. So if people have questions, go ahead and put that in the Q&A box. And I had a couple of other emailed questions. Okay, so I had a grantee ask this week, what do I do if I anticipate that reviewers will criticize some aspect of the project, but to address that aspect is beyond the scope of the proposed project, which is a great question. So I'll answer that quickly because somebody just typed another answer in here. So if something is beyond the scope of the project, like let's say you're not going to stratify your outcomes by race and ethnicity, and the reviewers are going to slam you, but the budget is not going to support the kind of recruitment that you would need to have a sample size large enough to power those sub-studies. So there are several ways to handle this. One is that you can handle it in the potential problems section and or the future directions section, where you say to recruit a sample size large enough to power these sub-studies is beyond the scope of the current project, but we will do that in a follow-up R01. Another possibility is to do an exploratory aim at the end of your aims page. And when you call it an exploratory aim, it signals to reviewers that it's partial. It's not going to result in some complete publishable story, in which you just look for trends in the data in terms of stratifying by race and ethnicity, but you're acknowledging that the sample size will not be large enough to result in statistically significant outcomes. You just want to look for trends in the data to inform the design of the follow-up R01. So that's usually how I have people handle that. Is an exploratory aim number, does it become like aim 3? Typically not. So you might have aim 1, aim 2, exploratory aim. That's typically how I see that. Okay, and then another question. I have a grant proposal that is a physiologic study in humans. It's been reviewed 4 times, and she gives the first time not discussed, the A1 27th percentile, new 1 49th, A1 not discussed. This is very typical. It keeps getting assigned to the RIBT study section. I did a quick NIH reporter search, and RIBT funds applications are like 99% basic science, genetic, molecular. If I want to avoid RIBT on the next submission, where do I indicate this? On the assignment request form. That's where you do it. So, and you may already be doing this, but in addition to listing your preference for study section, you have a narrative text box where you can explain why you are choosing the one you're choosing, and that gives you the opportunity to say, this is too clinical for RIBT. You could say it there. I know I can choose some sections in the assignment form. Do they read the cover letter? No, they don't. CSR doesn't read the cover letter when it comes to assigning study sections, so don't put anything there. Do we always have to wait till it is assigned and then make a fair and impartial review or request to the SRO? You've been paying attention to my strategies, because that's always what I say. You can ask the SRO that question ahead of time. So for those who don't know what she's talking about, this is a grantee with whom I'm already working, so I know that I've said this to her. You can contact the SRO and say, I think that I keep getting assigned to your study section. I think the basic science part of it is relevant. However, I really need somebody with clinical expertise to review the application in order to get a fair and impartial review. That's the phrase you always want to use. So are you, the SRO, willing to add that clinician who has XYZ expertise via ad hoc member to your panel, and have that person assigned to my application? I don't think you have to wait until after the study section assignment. I think you can ask the SRO ahead of time. And then if indeed you are assigned to that study section, again, that basic science RIBT study section, then you can make that request again. I think it's fine to make it multiple times. It's very unusual for them to say no to that. Occasionally they do. I have one person in one SRO said in the last cycle, we'll see. It's like the parent of a toddler who's saying no in disguised form is very odd to me, but the vast majority of them will say yes, because it doesn't cost them anything. They don't have, often these people just phone in, and so they don't even have to like pay to put them up in the Pooks Hill Marriott on Wisconsin Avenue. They can just phone in, and it's cheap and it's easy. So you can definitely make that SRO request ahead of time, and then make it again once the assignment is confirmed. So we are out of time today. So very happy to have lots of attendance today and questions coming in. I know that some people had emailed questions that I didn't get to. I will definitely get to them in the 2 weeks. We're going to do this every other week throughout the year. If you have questions, just email them to info@megbouvier.com. Anybody who has purchased a course or has access to a library membership is welcome to join these calls. So feel free to tell your colleagues about it. And we will see you next time. Have a great day.